Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Boost Bureau, where today we dive into the story of the Aprilia RSV4 2009, a machine that redefined what it meant to bring racing DNA onto public roads when this motorcycle first appeared. It wasn't simply a new addition to Aprilia's lineup, it was a bold declaration, a challenge to the established giants of the superbike world, and a proof point that a relatively small Italian manufacturer could stand toe-to-toe with the biggest names in motorcycling. So in this journey together, we'll explore how the RSV4 came to be, why it mattered in its time, and what impact it still has on the riding culture today. If you're someone who loves the way engineering choices tell a story, if you're fascinated by the blend of track-borne performance and street-ready adaptation, then this is a ride worth taking, because the RSV4 2009 wasn't just about numbers on a spec sheet. It was about character, ambition, and risk. To begin, imagine the mid-2000s landscape of sport bikes. Japanese manufacturers dominated the field with highly refined inline fours. Ducati carved out prestige with its V-twin superbikes. And Aprilia was best known for its two-stroke legends and its Mila V-twin sport machines. Into this competitive space, Aprilia envisioned a bike that could fuse MotoGP learnings with production accessibility, but doing so meant leaving behind tradition and embracing something new. A V4 engine layout, compact, aggressive, and distinctly different from what most riders were used to. This decision alone set the RSV4 apart before it even touched the tarmac. Yet the true intrigue lies not just in the choice of engine, but in what Aprilia hoped to prove. This was not merely a commercial product. It was a rolling laboratory designed to win on Sunday and sell on Monday. A strategy steeped in racing culture, but fraught with risk for a company without the same resources as its larger rivals. So when the RSV4 finally launched in 2009, it was met with both excitement and skepticism. Could it really deliver MotoGP-inspired thrills in a package that riders could trust on public roads? That question would define its story. Over the next chapters of this exploration, we'll peel back the layers, how the RSV4 was conceived, tested, and released, how it performed against rivals and carved a new reputation, and ultimately how it shifted expectations for what a superbike should be. Our path will move from ambition and engineering, through battles on track and on the showroom floor, and finally toward the legacy that continues today. So buckle up, because what we're about to uncover is not just a motorcycle's history, but a turning point in modern performance culture, where the line between race machine and street bike was blurred like never before, and where Aprilia staked its claim among the elite. The Aprilia RSV4 2009 begins its journey not as a production bike, but as an idea shaped by racing ambition. Aprilia had tasted success in smaller displacement classes, but the superbike stage was different. Demanding both raw speed and long-term endurance, company leadership knew that if they wanted credibility beyond the Mil V-twin, they needed to step into uncharted territory. And that meant taking cues directly from MotoGP and compressing them into a road-going form. This ambition gave rise to one of the boldest engineering leaps the brand had ever attempted. Micro-story, the engine gamble. When Aprilia chose a V4 layout, it wasn't a safe or familiar path. Competitors leaned heavily on inline fours or V-twins, proven formats with decades of refinement. Aprilia's 65-degree V4 was compact and responsive, offering a balance between the torque of a twin and the screaming top end of an inline. But the risks were high, costs ballooned, testing was grueling, and skeptics doubted whether such an unconventional engine could succeed in mass production. Yet Aprilia doubled down, betting that this choice would define their identity moving forward. Context Digest, Racing as Laboratory. Aprilia's engineers leaned on MotoGP experiences, learning how to optimize combustion, cooling, and compact packaging from prototypes that never saw wide public release. This meant that the RSV4 carried secrets born from closed-door racing experiments, a level of transfer rarely seen in the industry. While rivals refined existing formulas, Aprilia was writing a new playbook, hoping their racing-first mindset would pay dividends in the real world. Microstory, chassis obsession, beyond the engine. Aprilia's designers obsessed over geometry and feel. They crafted a frame that allowed riders to adjust steering head angle, swing arm pivot, and engine position, essentially handing over a toolkit usually reserved for race teams. This gave the RSV4 a reputation as a rider's machine, one that responded with razor precision but demanded skill in return. Few production bikes before it had offered this degree of tunability, and it quickly became a hallmark of Aprilia's approach. Reflection bridge. What Aprilia built wasn't just a superbike. It was a statement about control and feedback in an era dominated by raw horsepower. Microstory. Electronics at the edge. While rivals were just beginning to experiment with traction control, Aprilia was already integrating a suite of electronic assists tied closely to racing development. These early systems weren't polished by modern standards, but they set the tone for the RSV4's future dominance in blending software and hardware. Riders suddenly had a machine that could help manage its ferocity, though the learning curve was steep, and many found themselves humbled by the RSV4's sharpness. Context digest, market timing. By 2009, the financial crisis had shaken global economies, and superbikes were seen as indulgent purchases. Entering this environment with an expensive, high-strung machine was a commercial gamble. Aprilia knew that critical acclaim and racing victories were essential. Because sales alone couldn't justify the development costs, the stakes were survival and prestige rolled into one. Microstory. First impressions. Test riders and journalists who swung a leg over the RSV4 were struck by how different it felt. The compactness of the chassis, the immediacy of throttle response, the sensation of being perched on a machine that wanted to leap forward. Reviews described it as almost too close to a race bike for comfort. But that edge gave it a magnetic pull, especially among riders bored with more predictable superbikes. Love it or fear it, the RSV4 demanded attention. Reflection bridge. And attention was exactly what Aprilia needed, because the true test would not be in showrooms, but on the track. Microstory. World Superbike entry. Aprilia fielded the RSV4 in World Superbike with high expectations. The machine entered against seasoned competitors from Ducati, Yamaha, and Honda, and its unique characteristics quickly became apparent. The V4's howl on the straights, its nimbleness through corners, and its aggressive power delivery caught rivals off guard. Though the road wasn't without setbacks, the bike proved itself capable of running at the front, showing that Aprilia's gamble was paying off. Context digest. Culture of comparison. Riders began lining up the RSV4 against the Ducati 1198 and Yamaha R1, debating which offered the purer expression of performance. The Ducati carried prestige, the Yamaha brought refinement. But the RSV4 introduced an intoxicating mix of aggression and sophistication. Suddenly, Aprilia wasn't an underdog to dismiss, but a serious contender, forcing conversations in enthusiast circles across Europe and the US. Microstory. Owner experiences. Early adopters of the RSV4 often described it as a machine that rewarded commitment. It demanded attention to detail and setup. It punished careless throttle hands, and it rewarded precise riding with thrills unlike anything else in its class. These stories spread quickly, building mystique around the RSV4 as a bike not for the faint-hearted, but for those who wanted a taste of MotoGP in their garage. Reflection bridge. With these narratives taking shape, the RSV4 began carving its identity as both a dream machine and a challenge. Microstory. Track day. Proving grounds. Beyond racing. The RSV4 became a regular sight at track days. Riders discovered that its adjustable geometry allowed them to tailor the bike in ways no rival could, effectively giving them a taste of professional-level setup work. This blurred the line between private ownership and factory racing. And for many, it elevated the RSV4 experience beyond mere performance to something deeply personal. Context digest. Dealer networks and accessibility. Despite its brilliance, the RSV4 faced hurdles in distribution. Aprilia's dealership network was smaller than Japanese giants. Parts availability could be a challenge, and this limited its mainstream adoption. Yet, for enthusiasts, this scarcity only heightened its allure, framing the RSV4 as a connoisseur's choice rather than a mass-market commodity. Microstory. Price of passion. For Aprilia, every unit sold carried weight. As margins were slim and the investment behind the RSV4 was massive, insiders knew that failure could have spelled disaster for the brand. But success meant carving a place in history. This tension shaped the way the RSV4 was marketed, balancing exclusivity with ambition and creating a halo effect that lifted the entire Aprilia lineup. Reflection bridge. Having established itself as a machine unlike any other, the RSV4 was now set to evolve, not only in technology, but also in reputation. And that reputation would be tested on the international stage. where victories and setbacks would decide whether Aprilia's bold gamble could transform from experiment into enduring legacy. The momentum behind the Aprilia RSV4 2009 carried into its next chapter as the motorcycle transitioned from a daring newcomer to a proven competitor. This was the stage where Aprilia's engineering choices would be validated not only by critics and early adopters, but by the unforgiving crucible of professional racing and long-term ownership. What began as a question of ambition now evolved into a story of dominance, refinement, and cultural resonance. Micro-story, the breakthrough season. In World Superbike, the RSV4 began to show its teeth. Max Biaggi, a seasoned racer with a reputation for extracting performance from difficult machines, became the face of Aprilia's charge. His aggressive yet controlled style unlocked the potential of the V4, and soon podiums turned into victories. The RSV4 wasn't just competing, it was proving itself capable of leading, rewriting perceptions of what Aprilia could achieve on the global stage. Context Digest. Racing's ripple effect. Every podium finish created ripples beyond the circuit. Riders watching from home began associating Aprilia with cutting-edge performance. And dealers used racing results as proof that the RSV4 was more than marketing hype. Success on Sunday began to translate into credibility on Monday. And while sales numbers remained modest, the prestige value of the RSV4 grew exponentially. Micro-story. Technology trickling down. As Biaggi and the team developed the bike for competition, insights fed directly back into production models, suspension tweaks, ECU refinements, and aerodynamic tweaks found their way onto showroom floors. Owners who invested in the RSV4 weren't just buying a snapshot of performance. They were buying a machine that evolved alongside its racing sibling. This connection deepened the bond between Aprilia and its enthusiast base. Reflection bridge. The RSV4 was no longer just a bold experiment. It was becoming the benchmark by which new superbikes were judged. Micro-story. Critics reconsidered. Journalists who once questioned Aprilia's move into the V4 space began revising their opinions. The RSV4's relentless pace, cornering stability, and visceral soundtrack won over skeptics. Comparisons shifted from, is this bike good enough to compete? To, how does this stack up against Ducati's best or Yamaha's flagship? Aprilia, once dismissed as niche, was now dictating the terms of the conversation. Context Digest. Competitive landscape. The Superbike arena was crowded with talent. The Ducati Panigale represented Italian prestige. The Yamaha R1 brought cross-plane innovation, and Honda's Fireblade was a proven stalwart. Yet in this environment, the RSV4 managed to carve a distinct identity, neither chasing tradition nor mimicking rivals, but standing as a singular vision of what a race-bred road bike could be. Micro-story, the sound of identity. Among enthusiasts, the RSV4's exhaust note became a character all its own. The snarling, high-pitched growl of the V4 distinguished it from the bass-heavy Ducati twins and the screaming Japanese fours. This auditory signature wasn't just pleasant. It became a cultural marker, an audible cue that an RSV4 was near, and for riders, it offered a sense of pride in owning something instantly recognizable. Reflection bridge. With its sound, style, and results, the RSV4 transcended mere statistics to become an icon in the making. Micro-story. Ownership culture. RSV4 riders often describe their bikes as companions rather than tools, because the machine demanded respect. It forged deeper connections, creating a sense of pride and identity around ownership. Forums and clubs sprang up, where advice on tuning, setup, and racing stories were exchanged, reinforcing the RSV4 as a cultural hub as much as a motorcycle. Context Digest. Reliability and maintenance. No machine is perfect, and the RSV4's complexity meant higher maintenance demands. Valve adjustments, electronics quirks, and parts availability were challenges, but enthusiasts framed these not as flaws but as rites of passage. Part of the cost of experiencing something so finely tuned, this acceptance cemented the RSV4's position as a connoisseur's bike rather than a mass-market choice. Micro-story, Biaggi's championship. The defining moment came when Biaggi secured the World Superbike Championship aboard the RSV4. This wasn't just a win for the rider, but a validation of Aprilia's vision. Suddenly, the RSV4 wasn't a challenger, it was a champion. and Aprilia joined the ranks of manufacturers whose machines had proven themselves at the highest level of competition. This victory cemented the RSV4's legacy in racing history. Reflection bridge. Championships brought glory, but the true measure of impact was how the RSV4 shaped the industry's direction. Micro story. The electronics revolution. Following Aprilia's lead, competitors rushed to refine their own electronic rider aids. Traction control, launch control, and adjustable mapping became standard features across the superbike field. The RSV4 had accelerated this evolution, demonstrating that software could be as critical as hardware in defining performance. What began as Aprilia's edge became the industry norm. Context digest. Global reach. While Europe embraced the RSV4 enthusiastically, in the US it remained a rarer sight. Limited dealership networks and high price points kept numbers modest. But this exclusivity added to its mystique. Spotting an RSV4 on American roads felt like encountering a unicorn, a rare reminder that world-class racing DNA could appear in suburban traffic. Micro story. Generational influence. The success of the RSV4 2009 laid the groundwork for future iterations. Refinements in aerodynamics, electronics, and ergonomics would keep the platform competitive for more than a decade. But enthusiasts continued to revere the original model as the purest expression of Aprilia's gamble. The bike that proved a small Italian manufacturer could change the superbike conversation. Reflection bridge. And so, with victories secured and influence spreading, the RSV4's story shifted once more toward the broader legacy it would leave for riders, engineers, and the culture of motorcycling itself. It was no longer just about Aprilia's survival or prestige. It was about how this machine redefined expectations across the entire landscape of performance motorcycles. As the Aprilia RSV4 2009 moved further into history, its role shifted from a current champion to a lasting benchmark. The excitement of its launch and the glory of its racing triumphs gave way to deeper reflections on what it meant for the motorcycle world at large. This phase is not about immediate victories, but about legacy, influence, and the ways in which the RSV4 reshaped the idea of what a superbike could be. Micro story. A new standard of balance. Before the RSV4, superbikes often leaned heavily toward either raw performance or road usability. Aprilia's creation proved that both could coexist in one machine. Albeit with a steep learning curve, this blend became the template that others would follow, setting the standard for a new era where versatility was expected, not optional. Context digest. The shift in rider expectations. Riders who experienced the RSV4 began demanding more from other manufacturers. They wanted the same kind of feedback, electronic sophistication, and visceral thrills. This forced industry leaders like Yamaha, Honda, and Kawasaki to rethink their offerings. Without Aprilia's bold step, the pace of evolution in the superbike class might have been slower, less daring. Microstory, collector's reverence. Over time, the 2009 RSV4 grew into a cult classic. Collectors sought out early models as milestones in motorcycling history. The first iteration carried a purity of intent, unburdened by the constant refinements that later softened the machine's rough edges. Owning one became a badge of honor, a tangible connection to the moment Aprilia rewrote the superbike rulebook. Reflection bridge. What began as a gamble had matured into a lasting icon. Microstory. Influence on design language. The RSV4's aggressive, compact silhouette inspired copycats and admirers alike. Its sharp tail, narrow profile, and purposeful stance filtered into design cues across the industry. Even brands that never built a V4 acknowledged the influence by shifting their aesthetics towards sharper, racier profiles. Style in this case was inseparable from substance. Context digest. The V4 Renaissance. Aprilia's success sparked renewed interest in the V4 layout beyond MotoGP. Soon Ducati introduced the Panigale V4, and Honda reinvested in V4 projects. While Aprilia had not invented the concept, it had demonstrated its viability in the showroom. Proving that a V4 could appeal to both racers and everyday enthusiasts, this was a cultural ripple effect felt across continents. Microstory. The riders who grew with it. Owners who kept their RSV4s for years often described how the bike shaped their riding skills. It forced them to learn precision, discipline, and respect for power. Unlike more forgiving machines, the RSV4 demanded growth, and in turn, riders spoke of it as a transformative experience. Not just transportation. This emotional bond ensured the RSV4's legend endured in personal narratives as much as in racing record books. Reflection Bridge. The RSV4 had not only shifted the industry, but also left lasting marks on the individuals who rode it. Micro-story, cultural crossover. Beyond the motorcycle press, the RSV4 found its way into pop culture. Appearances in video games, posters, and online communities spread its mystique to audiences who might never ride one. The bike became shorthand for the idea of uncompromising performance, a symbol of passion rather than just a product. Context Digest, Lessons for Aprilia. For the brand itself, the RSV4 proved that calculated risk could yield extraordinary rewards, though financial challenges remained. The success of the RSV4 gave Aprilia a platform of credibility that continues to support its presence in global markets. The bike became a cornerstone of identity, anchoring the company's image around racing DNA. Micro-story, the enduring legacy. Today, when enthusiasts talk about superbikes that changed the game, the RSV4 2009 earns its place in the conversation alongside icons from Ducati, Yamaha, and Honda. What separates it is the sense that it came from a smaller, hungrier company that had more to lose. Its story resonates as much as its performance, reminding us that innovation often comes from those willing to take the biggest risks. Reflection Bridge. And that resonance continues every time a rider twists the throttle of an RSV4, feeling the echoes of MotoGP on ordinary roads. Micro-story. Looking forward. Even as electric motorcycles and new regulations reshape the industry, the RSV4's influence lingers. The expectation of electronics integration, track-level adjustability, and emotional engagement traces back to Aprilia's decision in 2009. Whatever the future holds, the RSV4's DNA will be present in the way manufacturers and riders think about performance. Context Digest, global community, online forums, meetups, and clubs dedicated to the RSV4 still thrive. What began as a niche has become a worldwide network of enthusiasts who preserve knowledge, celebrate history, and share passion. This sense of community reinforces that the RSV4 was never just a product, but the seed of an enduring movement. Micro-story. The lasting question. When people look back, they ask not only how fast it was or how many races it won, but what it represented. It stood for courage, innovation, and the refusal to follow trends blindly. And that makes the RSV4 more than a superbike. It makes it a story of vision. Reflection Bridge. That vision has become the RSV4's true legacy, echoing far beyond 2009, and so the RSV4's tale closes not as a chapter in Aprilia's history, but as an enduring testament to what happens when ambition meets execution. Its roar may fade with time, but its impact continues to shape the roads and racetracks of today and tomorrow. The Aprilia RSV4 2009 leaves us with a powerful lesson about what happens when ambition collides with engineering courage. What began as a risky gamble from a relatively small Italian manufacturer transformed into one of the most significant superbikes of the modern era through its V4 engine, its race-born chassis, and its daring use of electronics. The RSV4 blurred the line between MotoGP technology and street usability, rewriting the rules for what riders could expect from a production motorcycle. It forced larger manufacturers to accelerate their own innovations, raised the standards of competition in professional racing, and gave everyday riders a machine that demanded growth, respect, and passion. The result was more than just a motorcycle. It was a cultural milestone. Over the course of this exploration, we've seen how the RSV4's story unfolded. From its daring introduction, to its validation in the heat of world-class racing, to its lasting influence on design, culture, and ownership. It stands as a testament to Aprilia's willingness to risk everything on a bold idea. And in doing so, it secured a legacy that continues to inspire both engineers and riders today. For those who experienced it firsthand, the RSV4 wasn't just a superbike, it was an awakening. A machine that transformed roads into racetracks and challenged riders to meet it on its own demanding terms. For the industry, It was a turning point that accelerated progress across an entire class of machines. And for history, it remains one of the defining icons of 21st century motorcycling. So as we close the book on the RSV4 2009, let's remember what it symbolizes. Innovation born from risk, performance forged in racing, and passion carried onto the open road. Thanks for riding with us on Boost Bureau. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.